You'd think the day the entire HOA got kicked off the lake they claimed to manage would have looked like a war zone. But no, when it finally happened, I was just standing on my porch with a cup of coffee watching Sophie Ward scream as a tow truck hauled away her own SUV from the marina she thought she ruled. And the best part, the lake, the dock, the land under her feet. They'd belonged to my family for nearly a century. She just didn't know she'd been trespassing the whole time. I'll be honest, none of this started with shouting or sirens. It started the way most trouble does, with someone who mistakes authority for ownership and noise for power. And that someone was Sophie. She showed up one warm Saturday morning like she was leading a battalion, sunglasses on clipboard, ready barking orders to a tow truck driver who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the lake and float away. "That boat is too big," she snapped. "Remove it immediately." Her voice echoed across the water, sharp and hollow, like a ruler slapping a cheap school desk. I didn't move, didn't yell, didn't storm out. I just stood there on the porch rail, coffee in hand, watching the disaster unfold like a bad improv show. The tow truck driver hesitated, hands shaking on the chain. One of her board members actually slipped straight into the shallows, splashing so loudly a couple of kids fishing nearby burst out laughing. When Sophie slapped a bright orange violation sticker on my boat and it peeled off, floated down and stuck to her own shoe, I nearly choked on my coffee. And then my brother Sheriff Tom pulled up, stepped out and asked the simplest question in the world. "Ma'am, you got paperwork for this?" Of course she didn't. She had theatrics, not authority. That should have been the end of it. But bullies don't quit when they lose. They reload. See that lake? It isn't just water to me. It's memory. It's inheritance. It's the one piece of this world my grandfather trusted me with when I was barely old enough to understand what riparian rights even meant. He showed me the deed once the vellum yellowed with time, the seal of the county pressed deep like a fingerprint. Some folks, he said, will try to redraw a shoreline with nothing but a pen and arrogance. But water remembers. And so should you. I should have listened sooner. When the HOA first started sending letters, "Dear occupant," I laughed and tossed them into the stove. When they escalated to non-compliance notices about my porch light lawn height or the way my dock looked unharmonious, I smirked and filed them away. People grumbled. Neighbors whispered. But I didn't take any of it seriously. Not until the day Sophie announced in a board meeting on Facebook Live, no less, that the HOA would be reclaiming community waterfront spaces. And people clapped. They actually clapped. That's when my stomach tightened. I started keeping records. Dates, pictures, every letter, every ridiculous complaint. I pulled old surveys, notarized copies, tax receipts, the full chain of title tracing the lake's ownership back to the 1930s. If she wanted a paperwork war fine, I'd meet her on the battlefield she worshipped. But even with all that prep, I wasn't ready for the second invasion. The next weekend, Sophie marched down my dock again, this time with reinforcements, 2 board members in matching polos, a cameraman with a shoulder rig, and a man she claimed was legal counsel. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, sweating through his cheap Navy suit, clutching a briefcase like an emotional support animal. "Mr. Sanders," Sophie announced, "we're here to enforce Community Code 5B regarding oversized water vessels." Oversized water vessels. She said it like she was testifying before Congress. I took a sip of coffee and said, "Sophie, the lake's calm today. Why aren't you?" She didn't like that. She shoved a stack of papers in my face, a mishmash of bylaws, highlighted paragraphs, maybe a printout from Wikipedia. She pointed at my dock. "This is HOA jurisdiction." "No," I said, "it's mine." She lifted her chin. "The HOA has scenic jurisdiction." "Scenic jurisdiction." I laughed. "So what if you can see the moon? You own the moon now." People around us burst out laughing. Her lawyer nervously flipped pages. The tow truck driver sighed like a man having déjà vu. And right when things were about to escalate again, we heard a new sound, a Coast Guard auxiliary van. 4 officers stepped out. Sophie turned purple. Phones went up everywhere. "Got a report of an unauthorized maritime seizure attempt," the officer said. "Seizure," Sophie sputtered. "This is community enforcement." The officer looked at her binder, at her fake legal letterhead, at the absolute circus in front of him. "Ma'am, this isn't how jurisdiction works." Then he turned to me. "Mr. Sanders, your paperwork is solid. This dock is private property." I shrugged. "Coffee's hot if anyone wants some." The laughter that followed rolled across the water like thunder. The video of Sophie slipping on the wet dock, arms flailing, binder exploding into the lake, hit 500,000 views by nightfall. Memes, remixes, news segments, the whole works. I didn't celebrate. I just kept working quietly, building a file thicker than a Bible. But even with the Coast Guard shutting her down, even with the neighborhood laughing, even with the world mocking her, Sophie didn't break. She doubled down. And that's when the doubt slipped in. One night I sat alone in the cabin. A storm rolled over the lake, rain tapping against the window like impatient fingers. My desk was covered in papers, threat letters, HOA ultimatums, screenshots of posts accusing me of being non-compliant or hostile. I'd spent weeks fighting, arguing, gathering evidence. And for what? To defend something that should never have been questioned. I remember staring at that old deed, at my grandfather's signature, and whispering to myself, "Am I the one pushing this too far? Should I just move the boat? Let them have their stupid sense of control." For a moment I almost gave up. But then I opened this bottom drawer and found the envelope my grandfather gave me when I was 14. "You won't need this until you do," he'd said. Inside was a clause tied to the marina lease, a right of first refusal buried so deep in the paperwork that half the lawyers in town wouldn't have found it. That same week I learned the marina loan was failing, and suddenly every piece snapped into place. I called Grace Holloway, the only lawyer I trust. She listened, quiet and calm. Then she said the words that lit the fuse. "Carl, you're not fighting to win. You're fighting to protect what was entrusted to you. So stop hesitating and stand up." So I did. I bought the marina's mortgage note under an LLC, clean, legal, irrevocable, which meant the next time Sophie held a meeting on community property, she was standing on land she owed me money for. And she had no idea. When she tried to sue me, the courthouse was packed. Every neighbor she'd ever find showed up. The Judge Whitaker had gone fishing with my grandfather as a kid. He wasn't biased, he just knew fake authority when he saw it. When Sophie's lawyer presented bylaws as proof of ownership, Whitaker sighed so deeply the ceiling fans wobbled. And then Grace placed our evidence on the table. The deed, the maps, the surveys, the mortgage note. A century of documented ownership. Whitaker dismissed the HOA's lawsuit so fast, Sophie didn't even have time to gasp. "This court finds," he said, "that Mr. Sanders owns the lake, and the HOA has repeatedly trespassed. Case dismissed with prejudice." The courtroom erupted. Sophie screamed about conspiracies. Her lawyer begged her to sit down. But it was over. Finally, completely over. The very next morning, the eviction was executed. Deputies, Coast Guard, Sheriff Tom, neighbors lining the dock, HOA signs piled in stacks, no swimming without approval violation for unauthorized decor fines for mailbox color. Every symbol of their petty reign collected like debris from a fallen empire. And Sophie, in her pink blazer mascara smudged from rage, watched helplessly as her own SUV parked illegally across the boat ramp got hooked up by the same tow truck driver she'd dragged into this mess weeks earlier. He gave her a little wave. "Just following the property owner's request, ma'am." When the truck pulled away, hauling her SUV up the hill, something inside me finally went quiet. Not triumphant, not celebratory, just quiet. Because the moment she lost wasn't when the judge ruled, or when the Coast Guard shut her down, or when the sticker stuck to her shoe. It was when she realized the thing she tried to control, manipulate, and conquer was never hers to begin with. And as she was escorted off the marina, court order in hand, dignity in shreds, I stood on my dock watching the water settle. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands still, waiting for the noise to drown itself. And that's exactly what happened. When someone mistakes power for ownership, just remember the truth doesn't have to shout. It only has to stand its ground.